Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. When I stepped into Grandma's old kitchen, the first thing I saw was that stupid single candle melting down the side of a store-bought pecan pie. Grandpa Walter was sitting right there at the table in his old conductor's uniform. Hat, pressed shirt, even had his white hair slicked back like it was still the 1960s. But there wasn't a soul in the house except him and me. I dropped my duffel by the door and just stood there for a second. "You're kidding me," I muttered. He looked up and gave me this crooked little smile. "You made it." "Damn right I did," I said, walking over. "Happy birthday, old man." He chuckled. 85. Can you believe it? Then he looked at the pie and said, "It's from Kroger." "Don't hold it against me." I grabbed 2 forks from the drawer and sat across from him. "I've eaten worse from truck stops in Nebraska. This is fine dining." Quick note, before we go further, share which city or country you're watching from. We dug in right there at the table. The candle finally toppled and burned a little spot on the edge of the crust. He didn't care, neither did I. "Thought maybe your dad would come," he said after a few bites. I shook my head. "Yeah, well, you know him." He nodded slowly, like that was all the explanation he needed. Then he started talking about the old days again, running freight lines from Oregon to Wyoming, sleeping in rail cars, eating cold beans out of a tin. His voice got softer when he brought up Grandma. "Met her at a station in Eugene. She was waiting on her sister. I was late. Trains backed up from a mudslide. Guess she figured a muddy man was better than none." I smiled. "She ever tell you she hated that mustache you had back then?" He grinned. "Every day for 57 years. We finished the pie, no plates, just passing the tin back and forth. Then, without saying much, he stood up, walked to the drawer by the sink, and pulled out a little steel key. Scratched up, dented. He held it out to me like it weighed nothing. "What's this?" I asked. "It's the truck," he said. "The green Chevy in the barn. Ain't moved since your grandma passed." I blinked. "You serious?" He nodded. "Because you showed up," he said. "It's yours." I stared at that key. I'd driven through 5 states with barely 4 hours of sleep. My back ached. My hands were still greasy from fixing a broken air hose in Kansas. But right then, I felt steady, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I slipped the key into my pocket. "All right then," I said, standing up. "Let's go see the truck." We stepped out the back door and followed the gravel path to the old barn. Rust had taken over half the hinges, and the left door creaked like something out of a horror movie when I pushed it open. Dust rolled out in a thick wave, and the smell hit me. Old wood, oil, and dry hay. And there it was. The '71 Chevy C10 sat half sunken in the dirt, a faded patch of what used to be forest green. Sunlight cut through a hole in the roof and landed right on the hood, like the thing was waiting to be noticed. Tires were low, one looked damn near flat. Spider webs crisscrossed the wheel wells. The engine was coated in a thick layer of dust, like it hadn't been touched since Nixon was president. I walked up and ran my fingers across the hood. It left a clean streak through the grime. "You sure about this?" I asked, even though I already knew his answer. Walter didn't say anything right away, just stepped beside me and gave the truck a pat like it was a dog he trusted more than people. "She was your grandma's favorite. Used to ride with me all over Boise in this thing. I don't want it rotting out here." I glanced at him, then back at the truck. My hand was still on the hood. I couldn't stop touching it, like I was checking to make sure it was real. This truck had always been there, in the background. Daryl used to talk about it like it was already his. "Once Dad kicks it," he'd say, half laughing, "that truck's mine. Gonna put a for sale sign on it before the grass even grows." That smug tone always pissed me off, like everything he wanted was just supposed to land in his lap. When I told him I was going to trucking school instead of joining his little real estate team, he looked at me like I'd thrown away my future. "You're gonna regret this," he'd said. "You'll come crawling back after 6 months. That's a man's job anyway, Case, not built for girls like you." But Walter, he was the one who never doubted me. He mailed me a socket wrench set the week before I left for CDL school in Salt Lake, kept sending postcards. Real ones, with his blocky handwriting and funny little drawings in the margins. "Keep the rubber side down. Coffee's better in Wyoming. Trucks don't lie, but people do." When my clutch cable snapped outside Tulsa, I fixed it with a bungee cord and duct tape and called him after. He just laughed and said, "That's my girl." Now here I was, Standing in front of the truck Daryl always assumed would be his, and Walter had handed it to me like it wasn't even up for discussion. I climbed into the cab and wiped off the dash. The bench seat was cracked, sun-bleached, smelled like vinyl and mice, but the keys fit the ignition like they were made for it. I didn't try to start it. Not yet. This wasn't about turning the engine. Not today. That night, I stayed in the trailer behind the barn. Walter had kept it clean, stocked it with canned chili and black coffee like he knew someone might crash there. I kicked off my boots and threw the duffel on the floor. The steel key felt heavy in my palm when I pulled it from my pocket, small but solid. I set it on the nightstand next to the old lamp and stared at it for a minute. Daryl was going to lose his damn mind. I slid my hand under my pillow, rolled to my side, and kept one eye on the key like it might sprout legs and run off. I wasn't scared, not exactly, just waiting for the blowback. Because it was coming. Hell, I could already feel the rumble. I woke up to my phone vibrating on the nightstand. The screen lit up with one word. DAD. I didn't answer. It rang again, then again. On the fourth try, I picked up without saying a word. "Where is it?" he barked. No hello, no good morning, just fire. I rubbed my eyes. What are you talking about? The Chevy, the green truck. You think I wouldn't hear about it? You drove it down Main Street like you were in a goddamn parade. I didn't say a thing, just sat up and let him stew in his own noise. That truck is a family heirloom, he went on. It belongs to the estate. You don't get to just take it because you played nursemaid for 2 seconds. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, he gave it to me. I don't give a damn what he said, he snapped. You manipulated him. You showed up when he was vulnerable. He's not dead, Daryl, I cut in. He's sharp as ever, and he made a choice. He growled low in his throat. You think this is over? You're not keeping that truck. I'll take legal action if I have to. You've made a huge mistake, Casey. I hung up before he finished. I didn't need the rest. The truck coughed a little on the first start, but fired up after I gave it a little gas. The smell of old fuel and motor oil filled the barn like it hadn't left since the 70s. I backed it out slow, rolling over gravel and dried grass, then eased down the main road toward town. People noticed. At the diner that morning, I slid into a booth by the window. The waitress, Brenda, grinned when she poured my coffee. Heard you cruised past Mitchell's Hardware this morning. Thought I saw that green paint through the blinds? Yeah, I said, stirring in some sugar. Got it running. Brenda leaned in a little. Good. That truck should be with someone who knows how to drive it. Not just hang a "for sale" sign on the window. An older guy 2 tables over, Jim, I think, turned around and gave me a thumbs up. Your granddad always said you had more grit than the whole damn family. I smiled, but my stomach was tight. Everyone could see me now. No hiding. And I knew Daryl was probably pacing his kitchen like a wild animal, trying to figure out who'd ratted him out of his inheritance. Back in the truck, I checked my phone. One new voicemail. Daryl's voice was low and mean this time. You've made a big mistake, girl. That truck doesn't belong to you. I'm not letting this go. I deleted it without listening to the rest. That evening, I took the Chevy for another drive. Cleaned up the windshield and mirrors, even wiped down the dash with an old rag I found in the glove box. There was still a cassette in the deck. Waylon Jennings. I popped it in, and the old speakers wheezed out just enough sound to carry. The sun was setting behind the feed store as I rolled down Main again, windows down, elbow out, wind in my face, heads turned. People waved. Some just nodded, quiet but knowing. And I didn't wave back. I didn't smile. I just kept driving. Slow and steady. Let the truck do the talking. I pulled into the Pancake House parking lot 5 minutes early. Walter was already on the front bench, sipping weak coffee from a styrofoam cup like it was part of his religion. He had that same conductor's cap on, no jacket, just a flannel and suspenders. Don't you freeze sitting out here? I asked as I climbed out of the Chevy. He looked up, grinned. Cold keeps the blood honest. Inside, the place smelled like maple syrup and bacon grease. Packed as usual for a Sunday, families with kids, couples nursing hangovers, and the usual row of old-timers at the bar. We slid into a booth by the window. Brenda brought us 2 mugs and a pot before we even ordered. I told her you were coming, Walter said, pouring for both of us. She said she's proud of you. Brenda's always been nicer than she needs to be, I muttered. We got our pancakes, mine stacked with sausage, his plain with extra butter. Mid-bite, I saw the door swing open hard enough to rattle the bell above it. Daryl. He spotted us in half a second and didn't even try to play calm. Charged straight over like he owned the damn floor. "You think this is funny?" He snapped loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Sitting here like nothing happened?" Walter didn't flinch, just dabbed the corner of his mouth with a napkin. I set my fork down. "Not here, Daryl." "Oh no," he said, voice climbing. "Right here. Everyone might as well hear it. You lied, manipulated an old man, and stole something that wasn't yours." Murmurs started around the room. He jabbed a finger at me. "You think because you've got a trucker license and a sob story, you're entitled to everything? That truck was part of my legacy, Casey, not yours." I stared at him. "Then why didn't you show up?" He sneered. "Because I work. I have responsibilities." "No, you just expect things to fall in your lap," I shot back. That's when he turned toward Walter. "You're being used. You don't even realize what she's doing. Guilt-tripping you, showing up with that fake loyalty act." Walter raised one hand. Calm as hell. "She didn't steal anything," he said. "I gave it to her. Because she cares." Silence. Pure, choking silence across the whole restaurant. Daryl's face flushed red, lips pressed tight like he was holding in steam. Then he slammed both hands on the table, hard enough to make our silverware jump. "Unbelievable," he hissed, then turned and stormed out, the bell on the door shrieking behind him. Everyone was staring. Forks paused midair, coffee mugs frozen inches from lips. Walter just went back to his pancakes. A minute later, an old guy in a VFW ball cap scooted out from his booth across the aisle. He leaned over and looked me straight in the eye. "You hold on to that truck, girl," he said. "You earned it." I gave him a small nod, but my jaw was locked tight. My heart was hammering, but I wasn't shaking. I wasn't scared. I was done shrinking myself. I picked up my fork and took another bite. Syrup had cooled. Pancakes were cold. Didn't matter. 3 mornings later, I heard tires on gravel outside my trailer. I cracked the door, and there he was, Deputy Cole. Stiff posture, clipboard under one arm, envelope in hand. He looked like he didn't want to be there. "Morning, Casey." "What is it?" He held out the envelope. "You've been served." I took it. Thick, heavy, legal typeface on the front. My name underlined, bold. "Daryl's suing?" I asked, even though I already knew. Cole nodded. "Claiming the Chevy's part of the estate." I didn't say thanks. Just closed the door and sat down on the edge of the bed. The envelope stared back at me. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there with it in my lap like it was ticking. Eventually, I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Walter's. No music, just road noise and engine hum and the sound of my pulse hammering in my ears. He was in the backyard garden, poking around the tomato cages. "Daryl filed," I said, holding the envelope out. He didn't even flinch, just sighed and stood up straighter. "Figured that might come eventually?" I followed him into the house. He moved slow, deliberate, like this was just another chore he'd been meaning to get to. He opened a drawer by the old roll-top desk and pulled out a yellow manila folder, slid it across the table to me. "What's this?" "Letter," he said. Signed, notarized, dated 2 years ago. States the truck was gifted, not inherited. I kept the original title too. Transferred in your name, just never filed it at the DMV. I opened the folder. His handwriting was all over the first page, shaky but clear. The notary seal at the bottom looked official enough. "You were ready for this?" I asked. Walter sat down across from me. "When your father told me trucking was wasting gas and time, I knew he'd throw a fit one day when I passed this to you. So I did it early." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked me square in the eye. "Because I didn't want it to feel like a handout. I wanted it to mean something when the time came." I folded the papers back into the folder. It means everything. We headed to the town library, Walter riding shotgun. I made copies of the title and the letter. The copy machine stuttered a bit, then spit them out warm and curling at the corners. The librarian, Miss Fay, looked over at me from her desk. "You're doing the right thing, Casey." I gave her a tight nod. "I know." Back at the trailer, I laid everything out on the counter. Papers, envelope, title, copies. Lined them up like a war map. I wasn't scared. I was pissed. Daryl wasn't just trying to take a truck. He was trying to rewrite history. Pretend he gave a damn about Walter after years of absence, like he'd ever cared about anything but his name on a deed. I took a marker and labeled each copy in bold letters. Original, copy, exhibit. Court was coming, and I'd be ready. The courthouse smelled like pine cleaner and old paper. I sat in the front row, my folder of documents clutched so tight, my knuckles were white. Behind me, it felt like half the damn town had shown up. Folks from the diner, the feed store, even that cranky guy who runs the tire shop. Daryl walked in like he was starring in a TV show. Fresh haircut, pressed blazer, fake tan that looked like it belonged in Phoenix, not Idaho. His lawyer was some out-of-town suit with a Bluetooth in one ear and a rolling briefcase. Me? I was wearing jeans and my cleanest flannel. Hair pulled back, boots scuffed but solid. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Barron. She stepped in like she didn't give a damn who was watching. Black robe, silver hair, sharp eyes. Sat down, adjusted her glasses, and got straight to it. This case concerns a 1971 Chevrolet C10 and whether it was lawfully gifted or remains property of the estate. Plaintiff? She nodded toward Daryl's table. His lawyer stood. Your Honor, the vehicle in question is a family heirloom. My client's father never filed a formal transfer of ownership, making the truck part of his eventual estate. We believe this was a misunderstanding, easily resolved by returning the truck to its rightful heir. Judge Barron raised an eyebrow. Which heir? The lawyer hesitated. Mr. Daryl Morgan. She looked at me. Miss Morgan. Your response? I stood up and walked to the front table. My boots echoed hard against the floor. I've got a notarized letter from 2 years ago, Your Honor, signed by Walter Morgan, my grandfather, stating that he gifted me the truck while alive. I've also got the signed original title, dated the same day. She nodded once. Submit them. I handed over the copies I'd labeled Original and Exhibit A. Her clerk took them, scanned through, and passed them to her. Judge Barron studied them longer than I expected. Then she looked up. Mr. Walter Morgan, you're present? Walter stood, straight-backed in his Sunday shirt and belt with the old brass buckle. Didn't even look nervous. Can you confirm the contents of this letter? She asked. I wrote it, he said loud and clear. Gave her the truck because I wanted to see it used by someone who gave a damn. Not sold, not parked. Used. The whole room went still. Did you feel pressured in any way? The judge asked. He shook his head. No, ma'am. She didn't ask for a thing. Daryl rolled his eyes so hard it was audible. Judge Barron nodded slowly. Anyone else here with relevant testimony? A hand went up in the back. I turned. It was Troy, the mechanic from Mitchell's Auto. State your name, the judge said. Troy Naylor, Your Honor. I did the first oil change after she got it running. Saw that title with my own eyes. It was signed already. I told her she ought to get it registered soon. Judge Barron nodded again. Anyone else? A woman stood near the aisle. Marlene, the postwoman. I delivered that notarized letter when it came back from the bank 2 years ago. Remember it clear as day. Had his return address right on the corner. Another voice chimed in. Jen, the girl who worked nights at the gas station. She's been taking care of that truck like it's her baby. Shows up every week for supplies. Never seen Daryl so much as buy a wiper blade. Judge Barron held up a hand. All right, that's enough for now. She glanced between me and Daryl, then let out a long breath through her nose. Based on what's been presented today, the court will require signed affidavits from each supporting witness by end of week. I'm not issuing a ruling without documentation. Daryl's lawyer looked like he'd just swallowed a nail. This hearing is continued, she said. Both parties will reconvene next Monday. Dismissed. The gavel cracked once. I turned around. The people in the pews didn't move right away. Then someone clapped once, then again. A slow, soft ripple of approval, like folks had just seen something decent for a change. Walter put his hand on my shoulder as we walked out. You did fine, he said. You stood your ground. I'm not done yet, I told him. Not by a long shot. We stepped out of the courthouse and people were still buzzing. Some shook my hand, others just nodded. But the look in their eyes said it all. They'd picked a side, and it sure as hell wasn't Daryl's. By Tuesday, I couldn't pump gas without someone stopping me. At the Shell station, Old Man Granger waved me over. You still driving that green beauty? I pointed to it at the pump. Still runs like hell, but she runs. He chuckled and pressed a folded bill into my palm. Get yourself a coffee. Your granddad would have liked seeing you in that driver's seat. I tried to hand it back. He closed my fingers around it. Inside, the cashier, Julie, barely out of high school, slid a travel mug across the counter without charging me. For Walter, she said. He always asked about my grades, even sent me a birthday card once, keep the truck in the family. That kept happening. Every day, a new memory, a fresh nod, a whispered, "Good job, girl." Meanwhile, Daryl was unraveling. At Keller's Hardware, where he used to hold court at the register with his real estate buddies, I heard he showed up Thursday night for poker, and they told him the table was full, even when it wasn't. At church the following Sunday, Pastor Lane barely looked at him. Daryl stood alone in the lobby, sipping coffee like it was poison. Usually, he worked the room like a senator, not this time. I walked in behind him, and every head turned toward me instead. "Morning, Casey," the pastor said. "You bringing Walter next week?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said, brushing past Daryl without looking. At the diner later that week, Brenda brought me a slice of pie before I even ordered. For the girl giving that truck its second life. She leaned in closer. Word is Daryl tried selling 2 houses this week and got ghosted both times. "Shame," I said. "Guess folks want someone who shows up." Saturday rolled around, and I picked up Walter for our usual run into town. He climbed into the Chevy like it was second nature. Every time he shut that passenger door, he gave it the same small pat on the dash, like it was still alive because we refused to let it die. We cruised slow past Maine, headed for the feed store and maybe a milkshake afterward if he felt up to it. At a red light, someone honked behind us, not angry, just a quick double tap. I glanced in the mirror. It was Sue Ann from the florist. She waved. Walter waved back. "You notice folks treating you different?" I asked as the light turned green. He nodded once. Noticed they started seeing what's been true all along. We rolled into the feed store lot, dust kicking up around the tires. Walter eased out and stretched, back popping like bubble wrap. Inside, a teenage kid stocking shelves grinned when he saw us. "Is that the truck out there?" Walter tipped his cap. "She's back on the road." The kid looked at me. "You really driving that thing full time?" "Only way to do it," I said. Later, after we loaded up chicken feed and dog food, Walter leaned back in the seat and said, "Funny how fast people remember what matters when something real shows up." I didn't reply. I just kept my eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. The town wasn't just watching anymore, it was following. We pulled into the fairgrounds staging lot just before noon. I'd spent 3 hours the night before polishing every inch of that Chevy. Paint still faded, but clean enough to see your reflection in the hood. I even armor-alled the tires. Walter chuckled watching me do it. "Gonna blind folks with that shine," he said, tapping the door as he climbed in. The fall festival parade wasn't huge. 2 floats, the marching band, the 4-H kids. But in our town, it might as well be the Macy's Thanksgiving. When the organizer handed me a sash for the truck that said Grand Marshal, I didn't know what to say. Walter just grinned and said, "Told you!" Folks remember what counts. We rolled into position behind the American Legion and right ahead of the high school cheer team. Main Street was lined with lawn chairs, kids waving flags, old folks sitting on truck beds. People whistled and clapped as we passed. "Look at her go!" someone yelled. "That's Walter's truck." I kept my hand on the wheel, eyes forward, trying not to cry. Then I saw him. Midway down the block, standing by the feed store with his arms crossed, Daryl. He wasn't clapping, wasn't smiling, just watching, jaw tight. His suit looked too hot for the weather, a clipboard under his arm like he still thought he was somebody. We passed him without slowing. Walter didn't look. I didn't blink. But he wasn't done. Half a block later, I heard his voice, loud and sharp, slicing through the music and crowd noise. "She stole that truck," he shouted, manipulated an old man and took what wasn't hers. People turned. Some stopped clapping. A few kids looked confused. He came out of the crowd, fast and red-faced, waving that clipboard like it was a weapon. "This is theft! That truck is mine! You're all just playing along with a damn lie!" I slammed the brake, hard. Walter braced himself with one hand on the dash. I threw the truck into park and leaned halfway out the window. "Get back on the sidewalk, Daryl! You don't get to parade around like you earned something," he screamed, spit flying. "This whole town's been suckered by a thief with a trucker license." That's when I saw her. Judge Barron, sitting in a lawn chair near the hardware store, arms crossed, sunglasses on. She stood up slow and walked right into the street. "Mr. Morgan," she said, loud enough to cut through everything. "You are not the plaintiff today. This is a parade, not a courtroom. Stand down or I'll have you removed." He looked at her like he couldn't believe she was real. "You're just letting this happen?" She stepped closer. "You made your case. You lost your audience." He took another step toward the truck. That's when three men in American Legion jackets moved between us. Veterans, stiff and squared off like they were still in formation. One of them, Dale, big guy with a limp, spoke first. "You don't get to ruin this," he said. "Back off." Daryl stared at them like they were traitors. "You're siding with her?" They didn't move. Then it started. A slow wave of boos rolled down the block. Not kids, adults, old folks. People who used to buy houses from Daryl. The same people who used to invite him to barbecues and vote for his stupid HOA board campaigns. He turned red, then purple. His mouth opened, then closed. Then he just stood there, helpless, stuck in the middle of the street while the town turned on him. Someone shouted, "Get out of the road, Daryl!" Another voice added, "Let the real Morgan family through." He dropped the clipboard. It hit the pavement with a sad little smack. Then he walked off. Didn't say a word. Just disappeared into the crowd, shoulders tight, face blank. I looked at Judge Barron. She gave me the smallest nod. I shifted the truck back into drive and eased forward. Walter looked over at me. "You all right?" "Yeah," I said. "He's not going to touch this again." We rolled the rest of the parade slow and steady. Kids waved, grown men tipped their hats. And through it all, the Chevy kept humming like it knew exactly what it was carrying. The Monday after the parade, Daryl's for sale sign came down on the Miller property. Big one, 5-bedroom on the east side with a wraparound porch. He'd been bragging about closing that deal all month. Turns out the sellers didn't want his name on the paperwork anymore. By Thursday, word was out. The Johnson listing pulled out too. Then the Fairbanks Ranch. His office lights stayed off all week. Front desk empty. I heard from Troy at Mitchell's that his assistant Lisa packed up and left the same day the newspaper printed a photo of the Chevy with a caption underneath. "Walter Morgan and granddaughter Casey lead the fall festival parade." They didn't even mention Daryl. At the diner, folks didn't whisper anymore. They flat out avoided him. Brenda told me he walked in Tuesday for breakfast, and not one person offered him a seat. "He sat at the bar," she said, shaking her head. "No one looked at him. No one said a word. He left before the coffee even came." Then Mom called. It was the first time we'd talked in weeks. Her voice cracked on the second sentence. "He can't even get a seat at the diner anymore, Casey. He looks like he hasn't slept in days." I leaned against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to my ear. "He made his bed." "I know, but—" "No buts, Mom. He did this to himself." She went quiet. I heard her take a shaky breath. He's still your father?" "Yeah, and Walter's my grandfather. And you don't see him throwing lawsuits or screaming in the street?" She didn't argue. The next day, I drove by Daryl's office again. Empty window, lights off. That stupid banner that used to say Daryl Morgan Realty. "Where your future begins" had been ripped down. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty either. Just done. Nobody brought up his name anymore. Not at the feed store, not at church, not even during coffee hour where gossip used to run hotter than the percolator. It was like he'd been erased. Even his poker buddies stopped asking about him. That Thursday, I got invited to sit in with them. "Just to keep the game even," Dale joked, shuffling the deck. Walter watched me climb into the truck that night after errands. He'd been quiet most of the afternoon, sipping his root beer and listening to old country on the radio. As we pulled out of the hardware store lot, he said, "Your dad's not a bad man, just a weak one. Big difference." I didn't respond right away. Just kept driving, the sun setting behind the fields. "He thought reputation came from signs and suits," Walter added. "But it's not what people say when you walk in a room. It's what they whisper when you leave." I glanced over at him. "What do they whisper about you?" He gave a small smile. "That I showed up." Then he tapped the dash with one knuckle, like he always did. "Reputation," he said, "rides with you longer than any car ever will." That stuck with me. Still does. Later that night, I passed by the diner and saw Daryl's truck parked out back. Lights were off inside. Nobody else was there. Not a single soul. Just him, sitting alone in the driver's seat, staring out at nothing. I didn't slow down. Didn't wave. I let the Chevy rumble past like he wasn't even there. A few months later, I drove that same stretch past the diner, only this time, Walter wasn't sitting beside me. I kept the Chevy running, changed the oil myself, replaced the spark plugs, took care of it the way he would have, the way he taught me. The passenger seat still had his imprint, like the memory of him refused to fade. I drove slower now, through town, past the feed store, around the square. People waved, not just friendly waves, recognition. Like they weren't seeing just me, but something bigger rolling by. Like the truck carried more than tools and feed bags. Like it carried proof. At stoplights, old men tipped their hats. Teenagers nodded like they understood something they couldn't name. Even Brenda from the diner came out with a to-go cup of coffee once and said he'd be proud. I parked outside the American Legion late one Saturday and walked in holding a photo of Walter in his uniform. Wide smile, cap tilted, one arm slung around Grandma's shoulders. Dale spotted me right away. He stood, raised his glass of Coke. "You did right, girl." I gave him a quiet nod and set the photo on the wall where the other old-timers hung. On my way out, a kid, couldn't have been older than 15, stopped me by the door. Ball cap backwards, oil-stained hoodie. "Hey," he said, pointing through the window, "that green truck out there. It really yours?" I looked at him dead on. It was my grandpa's. He gave it to me because I showed up. He nodded like that made sense, like that meant something. It did. I climbed in the truck and pulled out slow. Let the engine hum through Main Street like a hymn. Didn't turn on the radio, didn't need to. Walter's gone now, but I feel him every time I shift gears. Every curve in the road, every rattle in the floorboards. He's still riding shotgun. My father hasn't called, hasn't shown his face. I don't expect him to. The town already made its choice. This truck ain't just a gift. It's a story, a stake in the dirt. And every time I drive it, I make sure they remember.